First of all, before we get started, I'd just like to thank Dr. Jack Rasmussen and American University for agreeing to host this exhibit of photographs never before seen. So thank you, sir. All right. So it's my privilege to be here and a part of this. I'm Mark Minsker. I'm one of the assistant principals at Jackson Reed High School. We have Jackson Reed students with us. Isis, Tafaya, Phoebe, Ellie, and Dan. And they were instrumental in helping us plan out what this exhibit would look like. I don't do museums. I mean, I go to museums, but I don't know anything about curatorial studies. So Britt Oates, who's here, get us wave, is our parent volunteer who helped us to really figure out how we would do this. And it's really important that students have a say in it, because one of the things you're going to hear from our guests is that this is not just something from the past, that this is a lesson in community building. So how are we building community? So we really see this very much as, you know, an active work in progress. This is not a dusty history that's up here on the wall. This is a blueprint for what we can do moving forward. So I just wanted to mention that as we get started. And I'm going to introduce our guest. Many of you know, because you've read all the accolades and he's accomplished much in his life, that we have Topper Carew here, our guest of honor. These photographs taken by Joel Jacobsen, give it up for Joel, and Tom Zetterstrom, both men involved with the new thing, documenting the new thing. So it's great to have both of them here. I also want to mention we have Dr. Samir Meghelli, give it up for him, from the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. And it's really important that he's here because, one, is there's some fabulous programming going on over there, and if you're not aware of it, I highly recommend you go, including A Bold and Beautiful Vision, which is the next exhibit that's coming up. We have copies of these. You can learn more about that later. But before we get started hearing from Topper and Joel and Tom, I do want to start with you, Samir, because this is not the first exhibit of the new thing. And you had an exhibit in 2018, A Right to the City, and I want you to talk a little bit about that in that exhibit, and that'll kind of help us think about, because, you know, there could be a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen exhibits on the new thing, and we still couldn't cover everything that was done there. So let's start with the exhibit that occurred in 2018. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk to our guests.
Sure. Is the mic working?
No.
Hello, there we go. All right. Well, first, thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and yeah, congratulations to you all, students and parent volunteer, for pulling this off. It's really tremendous. As Mark mentioned, in 2018, we had hosted an exhibition called The Right to the City at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. And several years prior to that, I would say about 8 or 9 years ago, we began work on the exhibition that became A Right to the City, really looking at the history of neighborhood organizing and activism in Washington, D.C., particularly over the past 5, 6, 7 decades. And we were looking at neighborhoods across the city, but there was one neighborhood in particular that really stood out, particularly looking at how central the organizing and activism was in the neighborhood of Adams Morgan, not just to that neighborhood, but in fact to the city. And there was so much going on there, from the efforts beginning in the 1950s among parents and students at the 2 previously formerly segregated elementary schools, Thomas P. Morgan Elementary School, John Quincy Adams Elementary School, both of which had been segregated until desegregation in 1954. Parents and teachers from both schools came together to create an organization called the Adams Morgan Better Neighborhood Conference. That was the first time the names Adams and Morgan had ever been joined. Prior to that, that area was just a series of small subdivisions, Lanier Heights, Calorama, etc. So beginning already in the mid-1950s, the neighborhood we now know of as Adams Morgan began to take shape through the activism of residents there. And in the 1960s, as I began to learn then in 2015, 2016, there was an organization that emerged under the vision of Topper Carew, but also Betty Garman, and others, that really began to transform the culture and the politics of the neighborhood, and again, of the city. And I think part of what was so powerful about this organization that you'll hear more about from those who were actually involved is that it was multidisciplinary. You know, part of what we're seeing here is the impact of arts education with young people. You know, they were teaching filmmaking, photography, African drum and dance, painting, drawing, creative writing, martial arts. But that was one facet, very important facet, but one facet of the New Thing Art and Architecture Center's work. As Topper can tell, and I hope he will, the organization played a critical role in helping shape the location and the nature of what is now known as Marie Reed Elementary School. If you go to 18th Street in Adams Morgan today, you'll see a humongous school, which also has an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a community health clinic, sports fields. That was the vision of neighborhood residents cooperating and working with the New Thing Art and Architecture Center in the late 1960s, particularly under the leadership of Bishop Marie Reed. So I hope we can hear a bit more about that. So there was that aspect of the work. A couple of years later, beginning in 1971-72, Topper Carew has a vision for an organization of actually a neighborhood government at a time when the city did not yet have an elected mayor or an elected city council. And so he, with others like Milton Kotler, Marina Hickian, Ed Jackson, and others, created the Adams Morgan organization, where they literally created a neighborhood government where people could elect representatives from smaller districts within Adams Morgan who could then advocate at the city council and even congressional level for a range of issues. And so there's so much more I can say about the impact that the organization had, but I really just wanted to stress that the work of the organization was multidisciplinary, and I think that was part of the brilliance and the genius of it, is that yes, hundreds, if not thousands of young people were impacted by the exposure and appreciation for the arts that was able to be cultivated in them through the organization. But then again, through architecture and planning, through politics, the organization really, I would say, transformed the city, and I would even argue far beyond the city. I mean, we can talk about the national and international impact of the New Thing as well. So there's so much more I can say, but I wanted to just maybe share that context to say that, you know, what you see on the walls is incredible, and I really want to thank Mr. Jacobsen for really, and Mark for uncovering these photos and sharing these photos, and Tom as well, just incredible photos showing you a glimpse into the work of the New Thing, but also to understand that there was so much more that hopefully we'll hear more about from those who actually made that history. So, thank you.
Hi, so I have a question for Mr. Topper Carew. I want to ask, can you share from your life growing up in the 1940s and the 1950s, someone or something that might have empowered you in an influential way, and lessons you might have learned along the way?
First of all,
You're good.
good. Am I good?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Samir. And Joel, that book that was in your closet, you know, is very much responsible for what is happening here today. And Tom, I want to thank you for spending your time as a CO. And that's very critical, because we could take COs, conscientious objectors, and invigorating the photography that was taught at the New Thing, given that Joel had suggested we do photography and filmmaking. That journey has continued. I think it's very important to understand, and I'll try to do it very briefly, my development. In the 4th grade, my cousins and I integrated in elementary school. In that 4th grade, you know, I was just thinking I was a kid until someone made me aware of the fact that I was black. And how did that happen? In the 4th grade, a bunch of white boys chased me in a working class white neighborhood, and I got called the N-word. Okay, in the 5th grade, a white boy walked up to me, punched me in the face, laughed, ran, and I had a black eye. And the latter part of the 5th grade, I found a friend, white friend. We're riding our bikes. We're like maybe a mile from home base, and a group of white boys descended upon us. They did not touch me. They beat him and bloodied him. And Richard's parents said, you could never play with Topper again. Okay, in the 6th grade, someone else walked up to me, just punched me in the face. I had a black eye. Okay, now, in that same grade, in the geography class, you know, the teacher asked all of the young people to stand and say where they were from. And I panicked, okay, because I couldn't find a simple answer to that immediately, but then I remembered that in my father's family, which was West Indian, you know, I remember the food on the plate, I remember the parties, I remember that my grandmothers and my aunts and uncles would get up and dance to Calypso. So this answer spun into my head, and when it came to me, I said, I'm West Indian. Okay, now, after school that day, there were a bunch of kids waiting for me, and it was one of those oh shit moments. You know, I'm like, what's about to happen? So they said, are you Indian? And I said, yeah. You know, and they said, well, can you ride a horse? Well, I've been to a kid's party and been on a pony. I said, yeah, I can ride a horse. And then they asked me, well, what about a bow and arrow? I've been to day camp and had archery. And so I said, yeah, I can do that. There's no problem. And then they said, well, can you ride a horse and shoot a bow and arrow at the same time? I said, well, I'm working on it. And then they said, are you Cherokee or Apache or Sioux? I mean, what are you? And I remembered that my maternal grandmother was part Blackfoot. And so I said, well, I'm Blackfoot. I'm Big Blackfoot. And so from that point on, the toughest kid in the school, who was Albanian, became my bodyguard. You know, I was suddenly like royalty in this school, and he and I were in the same home room all the way through the 12th grade. There's a kid named Robert Carter, and he took care of it. And so my association with physical violence and with psychological violence began at a very early age, and that trigger has lived in me forever. You know, you don't forget that. Those are very traumatic, you know, kinds of experiences. And so, you know, I had this anti-racism attitude as a kid. I developed that. And, you know, that's what caused me, oh, by the way, in the 12th grade, I gotta tell you this quick story. I go into the guidance counselor's office, an old Irish dude, you know, because there's a lot of tension between the Irish and the black community in Boston still, and this was before busing. He says to me, Carew, what you want to do, man? I'm going to test high school. You know, I'm thinking I'm going to college. I'd worked at Harvard as a busboy, and, you know, students, you know, getting drunk and throwing roast beef on the wall. And I had never really been inside a college before, but my attitude was, if this is college, I could do this. And so, you know, he asked me, what's up? I said, well, I was at a Harvard Society House. And I said, well, I want to go to Harvard. And he says to me, look at me dead in the eye. He said, I think you should go to the Navy Yard and be a sheet metal worker. And I didn't learn until later. That's what they told all the black students. You know, I'm in a boys' high school. We only had 14 black students in the senior class. That's what they told all the black students. And so my grandfather had made me memorize the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. You know, his creds aren't too cool. You know, he's a very racist dude, but the poem is very, very poignant because there's a line in there that says, if you could believe in yourself when all men doubt you. You know, that's what I'm thinking. I'm looking at this old dude, and I'm thinking, man, this game isn't too tight, man. Because, you know, I'm not a sheet metal worker, man. And so, 3 weeks later, they hired a black guidance counselor, right? John O'Brien asked me the same question. And I said, I want to go to Harvard. And he kind of smiled at me and said, man, but you're a curiosity, man. But what's going on? I said, I like 2 subjects in school because no one was motivating me in this test high school. I like track and I like lunch. And he looked at me and said, man, but here's the curiosity, man. He said, you're testing at the top of the school, but you got no grades. I'm learning more at home from my grandfather when he would open those encyclopedias and he would slide popular mechanics across the table to me, you know, or popular electronics. And, you know, I was not allowed to buy toys. We made them all. So I learned head in hand at a very early point in my life. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what, man. He said, if you work hard this year, I'll get you into the Black Harvard, which was Howard University. He got me into Howard, changed my life, and then, you know, through a series of circumstances, I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I say to you that, you know, Samir mentioned, you know, Betty. The other person was my college roommate, Eric Jones. We were all SNCC people. So when we came to Adams Morgan, we came to Adams Morgan with intention. You know, I'd been in the South, you know, registered as a field secretary, registered voters. So, you know, I didn't want to hear, you know, all that's possible for evil to prosper is that good men do nothing. And we were the SNCC people were very highly educated. John Lewis was our chairman, you know, and very politically aware and very strong on, you know, making sure that democracy could be everything that it needed to be. We're still working on that. And, you know, we're still in the fight because, you know, we're at a very, very difficult impasse in this society. And so we were on point. And, you know, we came to Adams Morgan. I came out of the Howard School of Architecture with the intention of being a service architect. I wanted to be that person. You knock on my door, you're an organization. You know, I mean, the first mission that we had, we saved 49 homes of elderly black people that were going to be taken as a consequence of eminent domain, and a used car lot was going to remain. Now, you know that those older people would never make another investment in a piece of real estate, and why are you taking that? It was like that whole, you know, bogus mortgage thing where so many middle-class black people got savaged, lost their homes. So that's who we were. And so I'm there like, you know, anyway.
Hey, did you answer her question?
Well, you gotta understand, I'm long-winded, Tom knows that. And so, but that's what made me do what I do. I've been doing that, you know, since I came back from Mississippi, because I suddenly realized how I could be of service to people with the skill sets that I have.
Don't stop.
Mentioning you being a SNCC when you were in college, my question is, what unique lessons did you learn as a member of SNCC that you brought to DC to help you with New Thing and how you taught there, what curriculum was learned there? No, I'm sorry, it's for you, Mr. Carew. Mr. Carew, I'm sorry.
Oh, you questioned me. Will you better answer me again ask me again. I didn't quite get the question, so I can be shorter.
Put that mic right.
Okay. So my question is, what unique lessons did you learn as a member of SNCC that you brought with you to Washington, D.C. and in New Thing?
I learned a number of things. The list is very long, but I learned that teamwork makes the dream work. I did not come to Adams Morgan alone. My college roommate was with me. He was a SNCC person. Betty was a SNCC person. Teamwork makes the dream work. Okay? Now, I also learned from architecture that, you know, you can have a dream, but that's just an idea. But the thing that you have to learn and you have to exercise is how do you actualize an idea? That's a very, very hard thing to do. I can sit down or I can pass a box and everybody's got an idea, but when it comes to the actualization of the idea, that's very, very difficult. And that's where you have to exercise maximum creativity. And then you have to think about how you're thinking about what you're thinking about. And sometimes you need to change perspective, because sometimes if you change perspective, you'll gain another 100 points of IQ. So I know and I learned that it's a long road.
Can I follow up with that, Topper? Thank you. Can you hold? So, yeah, so among our colleagues in 68 to 70 was Jesse Lovejoy, who was Topper's, one of his right-hand men. Jesse could not be here today, but wrote a email to me, just to me, but I want to share it. He says, the first time I set foot in the New Thing, which was on 18th Street, the kids and the team were in the middle of repairing the whole place from top to bottom. Never forgot the power of that impression. Teamwork and drive, no project too big to undertake. The kids always helped and everything got done and done well. Jazz workshop, the blues festival, Mr. Rhythm, raising funds from Ford, all great experiences. He continues. Most impressive was Topper's great attitude toward progress and grace. As a leader, he was unparalleled in my experience. I've worked with smart, even brilliant people for 60 years, but I always say my first boss was the smartest. What I would add to that is, you know, it's not just his internal smartness, but it's its external execution. I printed out a bunch of 12 by 18-inch prints of staff, and I wanted to flip through those, and then I left them in my other car. Eric Jones, Betty Garman, Percy, Janet, Mr. Rhythm, Michael Boardman, filmmaker, unfortunately passed 2 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. Grady Watts, filmmaker, and later Academy Award winner. Eli Noyes, Academy Award winner in animation, Grady in documentary. Steve Thomas, a student at George Washington. And then the artists, Lloyd McNeil, Eric Gravatt, and many others. Melvin Deal, dancer, drummer. And then my students, the young ones, and some of them are here as adults, and then my teenage students. And Robin Walden, are you still here? Yeah, hey, good. Became my substitute teachers and remained my friends, and went on to form their own lives in communication. I have another answer to a question that's going to come up about photography, and I could deal with that later. But what I wanted to say is, yeah, the team building, that was part of the SNCC thing. And Topper assigned me to the basement to build a dark room. Somehow he got hold of an old, huge dark room sink. You know, April 1st, I show up. By summer, we got a full program going. And so I carry on. He never was like on my case or telling me what to do. He just brought in people who figured it out for themselves. And it was an incredible extended family.
First of all, Joel turned me on to photography and filmmaking. I just want to say that again. But I believe, some people know who Ella Baker is. She was the mother of SNCC, and what you need to know that SNCC was the student arm of Dr. King's organization. And so we regularly discussed how do you empower people? How do you build community? You know, what's the politics of that? What's all of that? You know, and at a point in time, you become so informed and so educated in that. Bayard Rustin, we were the SNCC chapter in Howard. You know, Bayard Rustin used to come and talk to us. And talk to us. We had old union guys who would come and talk to us about organizing and about how you build power. So power is a very important thing. Stokely was in our chapter. He created Black Power. Black Power is not about black against white. It was about black empowerment. Now, I learned from Ella Baker that we as SNCC people were not to be drum majors. We were to be drummers. And that's a very different thing. We didn't want pinstripe suits. You know, we wanted to be down there at the grassroots level, organizing people. And Tom was there with me. This was grassroots. Oh, Tom is telling me I should go to the next question.
I have a question for you, Mr. Jacobsen. How did you meet Topper?
How did I meet Topper?
Yes.
Take the mic.
I met Topper. I met Topper through Lloyd McNeil, a very gifted both artist, painter, and musician. And I don't know where I met Lloyd. I think somewhere in the DuPont Circle area, but he introduced me to Topper. And he was, I remember also, we didn't talk about it, very quick-witted, great sense of humor. And he retired as professor of art at Rutgers University, and he also has a discography. But I remember his telling me that people kept saying, I've got to choose between art and music. And then I thought, why? And he was just an extremely accomplished guy, a lovely person. And he's the one that introduced me to Topper. And of course, we became friends almost instantly after that.
Can you tell me about the camera you used for these photos? The camera that you used for the photos?
Oh, the camera I used for the photos? I used a Leica M2. I'd gotten that when I was stationed in Germany. I was in the Army. And I bought a Leica there. It was a sort of a new experience. And the nice thing about that particular type of camera, unlike the reflex camera, it was extremely quiet, unobtrusive. And that's what the photographer has to be as well. The photographer has to be unobtrusive. It's not about you as a photographer. It's about the people you're photographing. So that was a very fortunate thing.
How do you determine your subjects and what you take pictures of?
I have to repeat that.
How do you determine your subjects and what you take pictures of?
I really don't know. You know, something, you just see something and you photograph it. I mean, there's no brain process that seems to be going on. I'll give you an example. Is one Thanksgiving, I was over at friends, and a 6-year-old kid came. I was using a digital camera, and he asked if he could take pictures. And I said, look in the window, and when it looks right, push the button. And I mean, there's no thinking process in the normal sense of the word that goes on. It's just, you see it, you do it.
Joel, can you talk about the famous Stevie Wonder photo?
The Stevie Wonder photo. Well, I had worked for Motown. They called me, now how they got my name, I don't know. But back in 1963, I was contacted by Motown. They had the Motown Review. And little Stevie Wonder at the time was not permitted, because of the child labor laws at that time, to perform in D.C. They didn't bring Stevie Wonder into it. So I went first to the Howard Theater, recorded these youngsters who didn't realize they were going to become legends of rock and roll. Martha and the Vandellas and Gene Chandler and Smokey Robinson and go on. Contours, Temptations. And I photographed them at the Howard Theater, and then I went to the Penn Theater in Baltimore and shot more photographs. They wanted me to go to the Apollo in Harlem. I couldn't get away, but I missed taking a photograph of Stevie Wonder. But it turned out, about 5 years later, Topper brought Stevie to No, it was the 18th of Columbia on a rolling platform that was mounted on wheels, and there was my chance to take a more grown-up Stevie Wonder than little Stevie Wonder. And, so it took a long time, but I finally got a picture of Stevie Wonder too.
Question for Tom. Could you talk to us about the equipment that you used to photograph the new thing and your process for picking your subjects?
Okay, so, we basically, I was shooting, I graduated from Colorado College. I went to Pratt Institute for a semester, and there I took my first and only photography course. And, but my 1.0 classification was granted, and a friend knew Topper, and the offer was made. I came down, and by that spring, really just a few months out of school, was on the streets shooting my Nikon F. So that was kind of the top of the line camera at the time. And at new thing, Topper got grants left and right and ended up with a dozen Canon cameras. And Robin Walden is here. He brought his Canon camera in. We shot in black and white. I remember with Robin, we would be sitting downstairs in the basement at the desk, rolling up 17 rolls of film out of a 100-foot spool of Tri-X in our little cassette loaders. And then we had those in our pockets, and we were ready for action. And what occurs to me is, because there's one question that was aimed at me in advance, how did we choose our subjects? And Joel kind of verged on that point. I think we simply fueled the camera and let the kids work that through. They became street photographers. Hey, that's a component of photography as art, street photography. We didn't call it that at the time. They were just shooting in their environment, i.e. the subjects they knew, their friends, their neighborhood. But what's amazing about photography is it teaches you how to see, because, hey, sometimes you can't see it until it's reduced to a 1 by 1 1/4 inch contact sheet image. And then you see you've got something. The other fascinating thing that was of the time was the wet darkroom, the chemistry, and birthing that image right in front of your face into existence. There was something magic about that. And empowering too. I created this, out of nothing, in a sense. So the cameras that we worked with the kids were probably anything we could find in a secondhand store, a pawn shop on the street. And we had every different model of every kind of camera, and for different age kids and so forth. The teenagers, who came in, probably about 8 or 10 of them. And what a group, including David Rector and Robin, but really all of them, all had a sense of their place on the planet, quite honestly. They were interested in the arts, and hey, you know, we did cruise around to go to different environments in different neighborhoods. It's not as though we really assigned a theme. Now, other photographers who worked at the new thing as volunteers, like Steve Thomas, they may have had other strategies, but I know Steve really liked to take them around the city to parts of the city that they really were not familiar with. It wasn't their hood. So I think it was a self-learning and self-realization. Hey, and that's more or less how I learned photography when I was a kid, a Boy Scout photography merit badge. And, you know, hey, there was no real assignment, but you learn how to see. And then you acquaint yourself with what really interests you. And then you can hone in on that subject, and that's what I did in the subsequent half century.
I'd make a comment about that too. At one point, I wanted to see if I could just limit myself to the block I live near Lincoln Park and just walk around the block and shoot a roll of film every day. And I thought, you know, I remember pictures from Life magazine, you know, where vultures were eating bodies in India during the famine. I thought, well, that's easy. You know, the pictures are there, but just to go and look and let your eye run, you know, run the thing for you. And it was really a good exercise. I did that for a solid month one time.
Good exercise.
Yeah, I would like to express the overview of the organization. And we had these, I must say that we had powerful artists who saw an opportunity to lift the children and the youth. Very, very important, you know, to the core principles of the new thing. And my thing all the time was not only that young people would get some skill basis and get a vehicle of expression and learn and all that, but it was also consciousness, because I was very aware of our demographic. And I was also very aware of our time. And, you know, they just weren't getting consciousness. Black is beautiful. None of that kind of stuff was out there. And so, through our photography program, as an example, we would get them to see some of those things that were very beautiful, and in a way that they could look back at themselves by looking at others. And so I was very interested in moving a group of young people and a group of children past the tough stuff, poverty, self-esteem, you know, drugs was in the area, crime was in the area. And so I thought if we could get our arms around this group of young people, and with teachers who would love them, would affirm them, who were culturally competent and culturally sensitive, and then set some kind of expectation for them, we could get those kids as they were aging, and those young people as they were aging, through what was a tough time and a tough period in American social history. So that's what I was seeing. You know, all of a sudden we had the arts, you know, as a tool and as an instrument that could empower these young children and our youth.
Topper, can you talk about choosing the location, Adams Morgan, for the new thing?
Choosing the location was very easy. I was at the Institute for Policy Studies. Marcus Raskin, father of Jamie Raskin, invited me to be at the Institute, which was a progressive think tank. And so when I left architectural school, Betty introduced me to Marcus. I sat down with Marcus, I told him what I was trying to do, and he caught it. And he said, okay, listen, come here, I'm gonna give you some thought time to figure out what you're gonna do. So, the first location for the new thing was right around the corner, small storefront. I think it was 1811 Florida Avenue. It was smaller than this. And so I was practicing architecture in the morning and afternoon, and then we would turn it into a kid space because kids used to look in and they would go, who is that hairy guy? You know, wearing the coveralls, you know? And so, you know, heart opens, right? You know, and kindness, you know, ascends. And so we turned it into an art space. And Lloyd McNeil was our first art teacher. And the height of coincidence, and he didn't even know this, we had rented the space from his uncle. His uncle was 2 doors down from us. He had a moving company, and I went to him and I said, listen, I want to rent that space that's vacant. And we had figured out, like we did at our second space, where Melvin was, it's a dance studio at one part of the day, and it's an art studio another part of the day. Now, the other interesting thing, Tom, is that Lloyd didn't know, is that the Soul Wall, which Tom was very engaged in, was a building that was also owned by Lloyd's uncle. So Lloyd's uncle was all up in it, Lloyd was all up in it, and so, you know, Lloyd was the first curator of the jazz workshops. You know, I'm producing, but he's like saying, we should get this person, we should get this person. Roberta Flack, you know, her early concerts were with us. You would come to the jazz workshop, $1, Mr. Rhythm was on the door, and it was a place where people who could really appreciate music would come, but it was also a place where musicians who wanted to be appreciated could be heard. And it was a way for us to propagate jazz and a way for us to propagate blues. That's the first space. And then we got a summer contract, and we opened up, we went and got that old laundromat on 18th Street, and we got a contract from DC Rec, and that was our second building.
Another question for you, Mr. Topper. How did the new thing shake up, can you hear me? How did the new thing shake up DC with its culturally audacious programming?
How did we shape up DC with our cultural stuff?
Yeah, shake it up.
Oh, shake it up. Oh! I'll tell you how. DC was 80% black. And then when you looked at the DC Art Commission, it was all white. And I challenged that. And you didn't want my crew challenging you. You know, because political tenacity. Okay. Now, we challenged that. And because we challenged it so often and so regularly, I won't tell you about how they read me into the congressional record and how, you know, they read me to HUAC by saying, you know, I was some kind of dude, and I was just trying to make a difference. And so we eventually, shortly, got that committee, the DC Commission, diversified. And when it got diversified, it meant that the grants could now flow to other organizations. And as a consequence of that, that became a strategy to impact the tapestry of the funded arts in DC, so that the funded arts were not just Eurocentric, they were also Afrocentric. So that's one. The other thing is when the National Endowment of the Arts started, and Jesse was a part of this, oh, you did not want to see me come in the door. Because it was the same thing. It was, you know, just very Eurocentric. And so we started talking about, wait a minute, hold up. What about the rest of the people? You know, including, I was talking to Joel about it, we also advocated for an organization in Appalachia, you know, because they were suffering as well.
Marginalized.
Thank you. They were marginalized, right? Apple House. And so, we got that changed. A whole division got built as a consequence of our being loud. And Nancy Hanks didn't like to see me coming. So we got that established. They offered me the first job. I didn't want to do that. I was already doing community work. That's my love. Grassroots is my love. I don't want to be a bureaucrat. And because early on in life, I learned I can't work for anybody. And so, I mean, I just got to be honest with you, Joe. I just am not that person. And so, there are two very specific things. And then as a consequence of all of the programming and political activity that went on at the New Thing, we were, the Morgan School became a community, we organized that. That became a community-controlled school where the parents and the teachers, had a say about who was going to be hired as the principal, who's going to be hired as the teachers, what is the curriculum going to be. We did that. And then when we founded the Adams organization as a neighborhood government, everybody said you can't do that. There was 70 organizations in Adams Morgan. Many of them white. They said we will not get all of those organizations to the table. You know how we got them to the table? We fed them. We would go to the Potter's house. And then all of a sudden these people realized they liked each other. They've been fussing and they were divided and all. But we got this Adams Morgan government founded and it changed the whole DC vibe. So the thing is, you just got to, be stronger than you think you are. Sometimes you got to be loud. Sometimes you got to be quiet. But you got to have your eye long term on how do we strengthen our democracy wherever we are, wherever we work, wherever we live, and if you get there, change will occur.
To anyone who wants to answer it, can you talk about how photography at the New Thing grew into filmmaking?
I don't think it really grew, it just happened simultaneously.
I think Topper was a magnet. The design center was just down at DuPont Circle. There were talented people there. It turns out they were from Harvard. Portman, Grady, and Eli. Who wouldn't want to go up to 18th and spend some time doing something vital to the era that we were in, the 60s. I might add, I'm reading a very interesting book now called Silent Spring Revolution. It's about the environmental awakening of the United States during the long 60s. And I was part of that as well, but it was happening simultaneously. There was the times they are changing. It was happening in America. And that environmental legislation actually passed almost unanimously during those periods. The Congress and the Senate were on the same page, and we made great strides. In addition, LBJ and the War Against Poverty and the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, were all happening during that period. So I think there was almost a national energy for fixing the problems.
One sec, Joe. I'd like to add to that. As a fundraiser and I don't know if you and I discussed this, but as a fundraiser, I realized that our effectiveness could be facilitated by making a film about the organization. And where did that thought come from? Foundations didn't like to come down from New York to see us, so we sent something to them that they could show to their decision makers, and it was a film. That film ended up being very effective. Now, I want to talk about Joel's book. Now, why did we do that? Because when foundations receive proposals, they're 8.5 by 11. They sit that paper in a stack on their desk. But what we decided was to make something that was 11 by 14. And so if you put it in a stack, it stood out, and it had an orange cover. And it was so precious as an art item that you weren't going to throw it in the trash can. It was hardbound. It was a book of photographs of the new thing. Now, my fundraising strategy was always to have something that was bigger than 8.5 by 11, that stood out from the stack, that was artistic, that you wouldn't throw in the trash can, and that you might put on the coffee table. It was so elegant that you might put it on the coffee table in your waiting area. So sometimes when we didn't get the grant, we would get a contract to design their annual report. But that's, you know, so that was strategic marketing to make us be very stand apart. And so, you know, that's what that was.
Let me answer this question one more time. I never considered myself a photographer. I apprenticed as a film editor, and though they seem similar in many respects, they're really different. Film is a question of something happening over time, and in many cases it's more akin to music, in that a shot is significant by the shot that precedes it and follows it, the same way a note would be in a piece of music. So I've actually seen films that were all good shots and were terrible films. So it's a completely different way of doing things. You're putting the film together, and you're thinking in terms of time as well. And it's just instant images. Does that answer the question?
Just a little more to that. So after I discovered the potency of film as a fundraising tool, and given that we still maintained an architectural practice, and my partner was someone named Tunny Lee, you know, who I met at an AIA conference, American Institute of Architects conference. You know, we got a contract to develop the design concept for the Shaw Urban Renewal area. And we made a decision that would make that proposal more powerful was if we made a film about a typical family that lived in the Shaw area. And so somehow we got connected with Claudia Weil and Elliot Noyes, and we made a documentary called This is the Home of Mrs. Levant Graham as part of our presentation, again, to elevate the potency of the proposal that we were making for the Shaw Urban Renewal area. And then both of those things prompted us to begin to contemplate the idea of adding filmmaking for our youth as a part of our program. It was a learning experience, you know, due to these processes. And so I think that's how filmmaking came to be at the New Thing.
I would add to that, hey, we got to hear from Samir here, but Elliot Noyes was at the 2018 Right to the City exhibition at Anacostia, and subsequently put this is the home of Mrs. Levant Graham up on YouTube, so it is searchable. It is an extraordinary insight, cinema verite, handheld cameras, into the most intimate moments in an extended family. That's held together by a woman, by the way. And it's a great piece of black and white cinema, and I would recommend it.
I have a question for the group. What lessons have you learned at your time at the New Thing, and would you guys have done anything differently?
For my part, no. What did I learn? What did I learn? I guess I learned that I didn't have a racist bone in my body, and I was just very fortunate. Hey, I came from a white town in northwest Connecticut. We had one black kid in the high school, one black kid in the grade school. I guess I also adapted to the fact that I grew up in a very rural area. I really lived in the woods. And now I was living on the street. And so that was an eye-opener for me. And so I brought with me an affection for Topper and his Indian heritage, and Blackfoot, and have ever since had an affinity for Black America, and long to spend more time with you, and have developed other great black friends, and Robin Walden has remained a good friend of mine throughout. So I guess it was diversity training was what I took away from it.
You know, I was thought to be this long-haired militant. I suspected I was. But we were in a heavy time when, you know, black cultural things were emerging, black power was emerging. But I had decided that as black as I was not anti-white. And there was no way I could be, because I have white people who've been married into my family. And I used to think about that. And I decided that our organization would not be this like black extremist organization. That it would be an organization that was, you know, multi-ethnic, but was on track with the notion of, you know, equity and equality and lifting up these young people and excellence. And so we were like this band of angels, you know, who came from different places, but shared comparable values about how to improve the quality of life of Adams Morgan. We all shared that. We lived there. We worked there. We ate there. We slept there. We were in that community. And so that's why you hear me say sometimes that teamwork makes the dream work, right? And, you know, the values of the New Thing were very elevated, you know, and they represented the best values of democracy. And the idea that we put forward is that we're filling out the tapestry, you know, of excellence, of opportunity, of art, of expression, and I still do that.
I grew up, I'm first generation American, child of two immigrants that grew up in the Deep South. And so was it? I don't think that, I never liked the word colorblind. I was always aware of color, but it didn't really make any difference to me because I was also at times the other. And I don't know what else I could really say about that. I didn't have to be sensitized to anything because of that. And it wasn't anything unusual for me to associate with other ethnicities. And so Topper can tell you, I mean, even in my neighborhood, I think I was the only white person on my block for about 10 years. And it wasn't, now what I would do different, I have no idea.
I used to get heat because our organization was not all black. And I was prepared to take that heat. And I used to get heat from a very black organization. And the head of that organization later became one of my best friends. I sustained, I didn't change, I wasn't worried about it, you know. It was a tribe, it was like a family, it was like a village, and you know, there was love, peace, and joy in that. My grandmother said to me, love, peace, and joy are to the soul like food is to the body. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing she said to me that we all have a little light inside of us. You know, and that's a light of love and understanding. And so I always look for that. Now, last Tuesday, I sent up to the International Space Station, you know, a film of children's choirs from around the world singing This Little Light of Mine. And it's broadcasting back to Earth as the International Space Station circles the Earth 16 times a day. It's going to a website where you can see that film. That film is a message of love, hope, peace, joy, understanding, courage, possibility. And it's that same kind of spirit that fueled the new thing. You know, so that's why the new thing continues. You know, new things don't die, they just multiply. And so that spirit of family. I mean, I used to ride on the back of Tom's motorcycle. You know, I'm not a motorcycle. I ain't no motorcycle dude. But I'm on the back of the motorcycle at the time I need a ride home. I'd be on the back of his motorcycle. And so, but it was definitely a brotherhood, sisterhood thing. It was a more evolved understanding of possibility, of community. And so that's what we were.
I see we're a little after 3 o'clock, and I know a lot of you probably have questions for folks. So before we do that, I want to do two things. One, I just want to briefly bring up Britt Oates to talk a little bit about the students and the work and the exhibit, because for us it was really important that we told the story in a way that was natural, that we could see the joy in these and the way we design it. So I'm going to turn it over to Britt real quick. And then I think what we'll probably do, instead of having a Q&A, because Topper's here, Tom is here, Joel is here, Samir is here, just give you all opportunity to talk to them after. So Britt, if you'll just come up.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to our incredible panel. Can we just get a quick round of applause? To American University Museum. Thank you to all the amazing teamwork that went into making this project possible. Thank you so much, Jack. I'm going to shout out a couple people who probably aren't here, but maybe Alexandra Schumann, who is our sort of go-to and our point person throughout this project. Huge thanks to Ali and the install team, Ashlyn, Nefertiti, Kevin. I'm probably forgetting a few names, but I just needed to take a minute to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Why? Because today when I came in and I started talking with some of the students and they were looking around, something really stood out that one of the students said. She said, we can see ourselves in this. She said, we need this today. These are students who are several generations removed from the individuals who got the new thing going, who established it, who brought empowerment to a community that needed empowerment. When we look at this story, we're thinking about context here. We're thinking about, this was a time period where people just came off the heels of the Jim Crow era. We're talking about a still segregated Washington, D.C. And we're talking about being able to provide empowerment through education, through creativity and art. That is what the new thing was able to offer to the community members, to the youth of the Adams Morgan, a historically Black neighborhood in Washington, D.C. You go to Adams Morgan today, and it looks very different. And even though it looks very different, the legacies, Topper Carew, Lloyd McNeil, Melvin Deal, the legacies of the people who started that thing, that new thing, they live on today. And the messaging that we wanted to make sure was clear throughout telling this story, community empowerment, right? Inspiration, inspiring our youth. Educating is key. Living art through music and dance. Those messages, those themes that our students helped us to come up with just from looking at their images, right? Just from looking at the photos, the beautiful images taken by Tom Zetterstrom, taken by Joel Jacobsen. They were able to pull these themes, these meanings. They were able to feel the emotion. And now it's Black History Month, so I'm going to be a little bit culturally audacious. When we look at these photos as Black people, as young Black people, the thing that comes to mind for me, these photos say one thing. They say it loud. I'm Black and proud. Say it loud. I'm Black and proud. That's what these photos say. And our students, they chant that to this day. Again, several generations removed. They are able to resonate with that just from looking at the faces in these photographs, seeing themselves in these photographs. That is what telling a story in museums should do. And that is what I wanted to help make sure these students understood when we took on this project. And I wanted them to see themselves and feel represented, because that is exactly what the new thing did for the community of Adams Morgan in the late 60s and 70s. Amen. So that's all I'm going to say, and I hope you all feel like you
And so you're going to have an opportunity to talk to all of these individuals, but because of time.
Recognize our students in the back.
Yes, I can. So if Robin Walden, can you give us the names, Tom?
Vernon Suggs.
Vernon Suggs, stand up, please. These are students who benefited from the movement. They're part of the movement. I hope you can talk to them too. And again, please hang out, see the exhibit, talk to our guests here. But before we stand up and we go and greet and talk to people, Samir, can we talk about A Bold and Beautiful Vision? It opens next month. And it's a century of Black arts education in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. I highly recommend going to see it. If you could just give us a plug for that, sir.
Sure. Yeah, so next month on March 23rd at the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum, we have an exhibition opening called The Bold and Beautiful Vision, a century of Black arts education in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000, which looks at the really, I would say, overlooked and underappreciated, but really rich history of Black arts education in this city. Organizations like the New Thing, which the New Thing is prominently featured with photographs by Tom Zetterstrom, Stephen Thomas, Robin Walden, and others, but also so many generations of artists that were educated in this city and who were themselves in many cases also educators, from Alma Thomas to Sam Gilliam to Lois Mailou Jones, James Porter, the list goes on. So please, I encourage you, we welcome you to come visit us and learn about that long history, but also, as I mentioned very prominently, the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. So I do have some flyers if anyone's interested, just for those details.
Thank you.
So the film I showed last night at the AFI, the film ends by saying the last chapter is unwritten, because I believe that there is more to do that's related to the new thing, and I genuinely believe that. And I must say that this visit to DC on this occasion has triggered an enormous number of thoughts in my mind about what I can do relative to the continuation of the new thing. Now, I learned this morning when I was with Mark, the tributaries, the artists. I mean, I can listen to FM radio, and almost every day I hear an artist that was associated with the new thing in some form or fashion. You know, I can look at television and see people who were associated. So I'm very interested in all those tributaries that were born as a consequence of the new thing existing and being present in Washington, D.C. And that's all the way to California. And so that's my final thing, you know, and I just say, Black to the future.
Thank you, Topper. Thank you, Samir, Tom, Joel. Thank you for being here. Please stick around, talk to our guests, and thank you.